really? So what was working with Roy like?
Well, I'll tell you. Roy's fun. But six months after that, Roy comes to me one day and says, look, I decided to give up being editor-in-chief. I would like you to replace me.
Holy.
I'm going, I don't turn 25 till next week. I'm going to be editor-in-chief of Marvel Comics. And he said, yeah. I said, okay.
Without even thinking about it.
Well, and trust me, I should have. Because you will note there was a period between Roy and Jim Shooter where they went through an editor every year and a half.
Yep.
Because it was an impossible job. There was not a comic book company with an editor-in-chief and a half dozen editors. It was a comic book company with an editor-in-chief and 55 books a month to produce. Yet couldn't do that, and I keep saying. And so each person in turn got fewer books because Roy had been smart enough to say, when I leave the editor-in-chiefship, I'm going to keep this many books to write, and I will edit them myself because after all, I've run the company, I know how.
Yeah.
And they said, sure. So when I left the editor-in-chiefship, I said, what he did. And I was editing and writing the Fantastic Four and the Amazing Spider-Man and Thor and the Incredible Hulk and random other things. So the next guy, Marv, had a few less books to edit.
Yeah.
And then Marv did the same thing with you. And
So
so eventually,
after Marv was Jerry, right?
Jerry blinked. He was there for, I think,
Like 2 years or something?
no,
Maybe
3 weeks.
No.
The editor-in-chief, he was there for 3 weeks.
Really?
Yeah, he came in after having been very disappointed to have not gotten the job when Roy left it, because after all he had been Roy's second.
Yeah.
And after 3 weeks went, got it, now I see why.
Now I see why I didn't do it.
Back to writing.
So what was it like at Marvel? Did you
Marvel,
have, like,
Marvel was the Wild West.
yeah?
Marvel was great fun because we were winging it by the skin of our teeth.
What year was this?
That was 25, so about 72, 73.
Wow.
Into the early 70s.
That was when I was born.
And I mean, my favorite story. One day during my editor-in-chiefship, I'm sitting in my office and a bunch of suits come in. And they say, hi, we're the accountants. I said, no, really? And they, we just went over the books. We're not making our bottom line. You need to add 4 books to the line immediately to help boost our bottom line.
That's not easy.
So I said, okay. Took my whole staff, all the staff was assistant editors in the production group. Took all the assistant editors out to lunch. I said, all right, here's the problem. People told us we need 4 more books. What would be good? And we spent a lunch hour coming up with 4 books we thought were viable under the circumstances. Went back to the office, figured out who was the best to write it, who was available, the best to draw it, who was available, called them up, assigned them the books. 6 weeks later, those first issues were on the stands.
Wow. What were the books? Do you remember?
The Champions,
Nice.
the Inhumans, Mudred the Mystic, and Bloodstone.
Wow.
Those were the 4 books.
All
And-
great books.
Oh, yeah, they were fun.
A
And
couple of them
years,
stuck around.
20 years later, when I was freelancing back at DC again, after I moved to the West Coast and given up my editorship and all the rest of that, I pitched, they were doing those Otherworld books too, and I pitched Nevermore, the Batman, Edgar Allan Poe team, to Bob Schreck, who was editing those books. He said, oh, I like this, I'll pass it on, we'll see how long. 3 years to the day after I pitched it, I got to go ahead to actually start writing the book. And I'm thinking, this book would have been on the year stand for 2.5 years and canceled by now at Marvel when I was running it.
So, when you were at Marvel, a couple things happened.
No.
A couple things.
Such
You're responsible for a few things that kind of changed things at Marvel, right?
Yes.
There's an issue with the Hulk that you wrote
Yes, there
that
is.
somebody named, I think it's Wolverine?
Well, yes.
You get this all the time. You have to stand with a speech, don't
I
you?
really ought to just publish a booklet.
You should. You just like, oh, you're here for the Len Wein speech? Yeah, just here's the Wolverine story, and then we'll talk about everything else.
I really should do that. It's a great idea.
I know you. And when I found out that I was going to talk to you, I'm like, can we not talk about Wolverine? But I'm sure everybody here wants to hear the story. That's one of the reasons why you're here.
Okay, when I publish the book, I want you guys to all buy copies.
So how did it come about? I've heard the story, so I know. But...
It's a collection of different things. I mean, it starts with Roy. Roy Thomas came to me and, well, actually, no, it doesn't. It starts with Brother Voodoo. I was doing a book called Brother Voodoo, which was set in the Caribbean. And I love writing accents. I've got an ear for different voices.
Yes, you
so
do.
I would write the accents in. And one day, you know, it was a strip I loved. I thought it was one of the best things I've ever done. Still do. Ran 6 issues. So here's what I know. And Roy calls me in and says, look, I've been reading Brother Voodoo and I hate you. And I said, thanks. And he said, well, no, I just can't write accents. I've never been able to do it. And I really admire your ability to write accent. I would like to hear you write a Canadian accent. So I have a name, Wolverine, and give me a Canadian character so I can hear how you do Canadians.
Wow. So it came out as a challenge.
It did.
I've never heard that story.
And I went home and did what writers don't do as much anymore, but we used to do all the time. I did research. And I discovered Wolverines were short, hairy, nasty little creatures with razor-sharp claws who were fearless and would take on creatures 10 times their size. I said, well, that was 3 minutes and I'm done. Because that's exactly who he is. And that's where he came from. All the other stuff that's ever evolved out of him comes with the national evolution of a character who's around for 40 years.
Yeah.
But that was the initial where he came from.
And you just thought it was a one and done kind of thing.
Yeah,
right?
well,
like it was going to be those 2 issues and...
No, nothing's ever one and done. You know, when Tula Zuma comes back, you know, anybody can. But when I was designing and creating him, I decided there had been rumors going on for several years about possibly reviving the X-Men book as an international team of heroes.
So it would be, as you were creating Wolverine,
yes,
there was already rumblings about bringing back the X-Men.
I decided to make him a mutant so that
there was
whoever
this
got that
possibility.
book would have a Canadian mutant if they wanted.
Interesting. Okay.
I did not know I would be the guy who got that book. No, it's funny.
We'll get to the X-Men in a minute.
Okay, good. Fair enough.
So with Wolverine though.
Yes.
Now, I'd always heard that the claws were supposed to be they were supposed to be gloves.
Yes, when I created him, the adamantium claws were part of the gloves. Because I still don't understand if you've got these things back on, how do you bend your wrist?
They finally figured it out, but
I
in the movies they come out of the palm or something.
No,
like
the
that.
movies come out
Oh, that's right. They between
so
the
they
fingers.
can hold the thing,
yeah.
and hold it.
Yeah.
But it made sense to me, since I still don't think a real person has ever bent his wrist with that. He keep cutting his hands off. That they were gloves, and the things, because adamantium is indestructible. It doesn't need to be anything more than one molecule thick.
Yeah.
So they telescoped. They snapped out the place from those things in the back of his hand.
That's what the little
yeah, exactly.
bumps were basically.
And they didn't tear off, because that would be the next logical thing. You put them on a pair of gloves, and the first time he gets a metal thing, they tear off.
Yeah.
So the gloves were adamantium covered in cloth. So
okay.
you couldn't, and it made complete sense to me.
Makes sense to me.
Yeah, and then Chris and Dave decided, well, wouldn't it be cool if they came out of his actual arms? And they didn't care if he could move his wrists and not apparently. And that's where he went from there.
So, with the X-Men, that was a book that at that point had been gone, off the shelf.
Stan and Jack's only real failure.
Yeah. Yeah. Which is weird to say now that book was a failure. But it lasted for a while.
It lasted about 93 issues.
Yeah.
But for about 30 of those 93 issues, maybe even more, it was a reprint book.
Yeah.
Reprint in the early issues.
Yeah.
Stan and Jack only lasted, I think, 10 issues on the book.
Yeah.
And when they started not going to second stringers, but for some reason they kind of moved on to third stringers very quickly. They just weren't doing a good job.
But it was also, correct me if I'm wrong, it was also had this weird fandom to it. That
Well,
there were
Roy
X-Men
Thomas-
fans out there, and Roy was a big fan of them.
Very much so. It went through a period of, well, we're printing it every month, to suddenly, oh, here's a few issues by Steranko, to here's now a run by Neil Adams and Roy, which is one of the best runs ever.
It's one of my favorite, yeah.
Great lines. I mean, Roy at the height of his powers as a writer. Some of the best punchlines and captions.
God, yeah.
The page where the Sentinels all go into the sun is one of the most well-written things I've ever read.
Yeah.
The great page where they meet the good-looking silver-haired guy in a savage land, and then the last panel, as he puts on his Magneto helmet, he says, "I guess it's true. Clothes really do make the man," which is a great punchline.
Roy was master at his craft.
Yeah, he was terrific when he was doing that book. But the book still never recovered the momentum when he got cancer.
So was
So
it
when
was
I-
it kind of your mission, or did you?
Well,
it was
no,
Roy. It was more Roy's
It was
idea
Roy's
to
idea.
bring it back.
Roy was a fan of the old Black Hawk book at DC.
Uh-huh.
Black Hawk was about an international team of pilots who became adventurers after the war and stuck around for many years. It's a long-running book. But somebody upstairs, one of the suits, had discovered that a lot of the Marvel books were doing very well in a specific handful of foreign countries. And it was actually his idea, you know, if we published books starring characters from those countries, we could probably make a bundle of those books over there. So that's how it all evolved. And then the book got a go-ahead, and Roy decided the original choice, and I think I know, but it's not my book, wasn't going to do a great job, and looked at me and said, "Would you like to do this book?" I said, I guess. Who's going to draw it? He said, "Dave Cochran." I said, "Yep." Because Dave...
Without even thinking about it.
Dave is, again, he was also a member of our fanzine, our fanzine.
Oh, really?
Briefly, and never, but he was a great guy, and a friend of mine,
Yeah.
and one of my favorite artists. I always loved his design work, his brilliant. So they said, "Go, make a book." And we sat down. I picked Wolverine up, going, "Well, got him sitting there."
You were like, yeah, I kind of created.
Yeah, what are we going to do with the rest? Let's think it through. And so Dave had 2 or 3 huge notebooks full of costume designs, because he loved design costumes.
Yeah.
And we went through the books. And we kind of...
I wish that still was around.
Nightcrawler he had already created. Nightcrawler he had created to be a member of the Legion of Superheroes.
Oh,
and
really?
Murray Boltinoff, the editor, thought he was too creepy, and so he wouldn't want to use him. So, bingo, we got Nightcrawler, we adjusted the costume. We adjusted most of the costumes a little bit. Some of them were a little too busy. We went through Colossus. They didn't have names. Nightcrawler was the only one that had a name. But there was this great visual that we decided it should be a Russian guy named Colossus. And then we had 2 other characters. We picked up Starfire, or Sunfire rather, to have a
Japanese character.
Banshee, so we had an Irishman.
And Thunderbird.
Thunderbird,
For
who was
being-
created to die. Everyone goes,
I was gonna say, he was your red shirt.
yeah, he was a little superfluous if you look at his powers. The whole idea was nobody had ever done that before. So a brand new book with brand new characters and kill one of them off.
Yeah.
The idea was you'll never know what's coming next. And God knows that's been that book's history
Yeah,
ever since.
of course.
But,
And then you had Jean and Scott.
well, no, Gene was not part of the original crew. Scott was the only real hangover of the regular X-Men.
Yeah.
And then we had 2 other characters. A character called Black Cat, who was a black woman with luck powers, obviously, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
And a character called Tempest, the Tempest or Typhoon. I never remembered who. He was a guy who controlled the weather. And as we evolved the book,
Tempest
everybody was
and-
working out terrific. Black Cat, Marvel later created his own Black Cat for
Yeah.
Spider-Man. But Black Cat and, let's go with Tempest, just weren't working. Didn't like the personality, liked the powers on one, and we went to Rod, go to your editor. And we said, "Look, everything's great." And he goes, "Oh my God, that's all great. This one really is just, these 2 are, what are we missing?" And he looks at me and he said, "Well, one's got great powers, one's got a great visual look, and a more interesting personality. Why don't you just make one character out of it?" And so it became Storm.
That's great.
And that's why she used to have those cat's eyes early on.
Oh, really?
Because they were too cool a visual, even though they made no sense in it.
I-
We just thought it's still cool. And that's how.